Welcome to On Collecting, a series of conversations with collectors of photographs where we talk about their passion for photography, the inner workings of their decision-making, and how all of it has evolved over time. We also touch upon how collecting fits with their legacy, how their passion is being shared and preserved. In this first conversation, I talked with David Raymond, who, with time and patience, put together a stellar collection of vintage, surrealist, and modernist photographs. Let me share my screen and show you just a few pieces. So you may have even seen his collection, because in 2007, through a partial sale and a partial gift, his collection became part of the Cleveland Museum of Art's permanent collection. The museum had an exhibition of the photographs from October 2014 to January 2015. And in conjunction, the Cleveland Museum published this book, Forbidden Games. I highly recommend getting a copy of this book to add to your photography library. So without further ado, let's get into the conversation.
Hi.
David.
Hey.
Hi. How are you?
Right.
Good, good.
Is
It's
this,
so nice to see you.
it's wonderful to see you too. You haven't changed at all. If anything, you've gotten more beautiful.
Oh, it's that California weather.
Is it?
Yeah, yeah.
Hey.
Yeah. So
So I,
it's
I tried to set up a background that had at least some photography in it.
You did well. You did well. Wow. I love that. Looks great. Looks wonderful.
Great.
Fantastic. All right. So I want to just dive right in and get the conversation going. So why don't we start with, where you grew up and what your parents did for a living and what your environment was like growing up.
Sure. I grew up for the most part on Long Island, and it was pretty much a middle class existence, although my mother's family and my mom, they had a lot of colorful friends and extended relations. And so growing up, I was exposed to the art world. And I remember my uncle was the Sotheby's representative in Iran, and he represented the royal family. And
Oh,
so the kinds of people that I would meet and be exposed to just as a result of that on his trips to the United States was incredible. I remember meeting a young Tony Shafrazi before he became the Tony Shafrazi we knew. He was an artist first, and this is when he defaced the Guernica. And I remember Oliver Stone, before he became famous, coming to our house and visiting and chatting and talking about some of his film projects. And I can go on and on and on and on. And then one formative moment in my life was the art critic for Newsday, which was the newspaper on Long Island. We went to the Whitney Museum's retrospective of Dwayne Hanson's work. This
uh-huh.
was like in the mid 70s, and I was a boy, and I remember walking through the show with her, and her explaining to me what this form of realism was, and I would stare at the sculpture and wait for them to breathe. And I remember that anticipation. And what's fascinating is that I realized in your mind, you almost create that reality as you look at these objects. And so that got me thinking about, what's the nature of art and how does it influence the way we see the world?
And how old were you when you were thinking that?
I was between 14, 15.
Amazing.
And at
Amazing.
the time, I have to say that I was also taking pictures. I started photography when I was about 9 years old at sleepaway camp. And I would develop the film and print my own prints. So I started to see the world through a viewfinder and
Uh-huh.
a lens. And so all of these things came together to inform me.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
In
And
fact, I can show you something. I just found this. My mother passed away recently, and we've been going through papers, and I found my high school's yearbook. It was not like the yearbook with our pictures, but it was a yearbook of creative stuff. And one of my photographs was the frontispiece for this thing. Can I share it with you?
yes, please, please.
So here it is from Schreiber High School in Port Washington. And I forgot, but I opened it up and there was a photograph by David Raymond.
Wow. Oh, wow. Oh, I love it. I just love it. Oh, that's fantastic.
So that was kind of the beginnings of my journey.
So you came to photography early, which is fantastic. And so how did you go from thinking about, you know, taking photographs, making photographs to the idea of collecting other people's work? Was there some sort of defining moment? Did you feel like, how were you exposed to the idea of collecting? How did it seep into your life?
When I was in my early 20s, I graduated from NYU Business School, and my intention was to get involved in the world of marketing. And I moved to San Francisco in 1985, and I started job interviews, and all these companies wanted me to work in sales. And I was not relating to that. I didn't want to do that. I wanted to be on the creative side.
Mm-hmm.
And I needed a job. And I ended up finding a job working at a gallery on Union Street in San Francisco. So I didn't want to do sales, but I ended up doing sales and art. And I found that I was really good at it. And it led me to really do a deep dive to research stuff. I remember reading Art and Auction feverishly every month. I remember going to the San Francisco Public Library, which had an incredible arts section. They literally had a building devoted to art. And I would go and dive into the catalog raisonnés and just absorb and keep on taking it. I'd take books home and I'd be like, I should have taken the Evelyn Wood speed reading course because it was my passion and everything. And I would look at everything, I would touch everything. And I remember going from trying to take a piece off the wall and shaking with nervousness that I was going to drop it or damage it, to being comfortable handling a piece of art, touching the surface gently, turning over a piece of art, feeling it, smelling it, just having that whole tactile experience. And all of a sudden, from just being an observer, I became very intimate. And I left the gallery and I wanted to stay in the art world. So I started trying to buy and sell and broker with various degrees of success and failures. And then I encountered a collector from Silicon Valley who wanted to start a painting collection.
Mm-hmm.
And so I sold him a lot of paintings. But then he said, I'm really interested in photography from the history of California. And I went, okay, I can do this. The very first piece that I bought for him was A Migrant Mother by Dorothea Lange. And that kind of set me off in the market. This was like 1992. And I started making photography my priority. And one day I went to the San Francisco Public Library and I found the catalog for the surrealist show L'amour fou, which was the first major surrealist photography and collage exhibition in the United States. That book changed my life.
Wow.
All of a sudden, I was interested in surrealism. And it was an extension of my childhood of looking at the world and wanting to see more and understanding how art affects the way we see. And this was it. This was my life. I
Yes.
got it. And so I started to recommend to my client to buy surrealist stuff. He didn't connect with it.
Mhm.
And it was painful because I couldn't, I wanted to have a connection to the work. I couldn't afford it. And so this was the way that I could at least have some level of intimacy that could continue. So I said, I'm doing it. I'm going to buy the work myself. I'm going to make it work. And the very first surrealist photograph I bought was an Andre Kertész, who you normally wouldn't think of as a surrealist. And it was a photograph of a clock with a rope wrapped around it. And it had apparently been once owned by Andre Breton.
Oh.
I bought it at auction, and that set me off. And that piece is now in the Cleveland Museum.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Yes, we're gonna get to the Cleveland Museum and your collection and all of that, which is just amazing. So okay, so it started with a Dorothea Lange, and then in with surrealism. And that's how you started collecting. Um, and and through all of that, like, what would you say helped you develop your eye the most? Was it mostly just reading and looking at catalogs and that sort of thing, or was it going around to galleries and auctions, or what really, like, how did you think when you got into looking at surrealist work, like, how did you navigate that, figuring out what was what and what directions you wanted to go or concentrate, or how you wanted to approach your own collecting from that point on?
Well, I can answer it in a few ways. I got to know Peter Sells, who was a great curator, one of the great curators of the 20th century. He lived in the Bay Area, and he was fascinated by some of the things I was doing with contemporary art, which is a whole other story. But Peter once said to me, while his colleagues were out looking at slides, this was before JPEGs, way before JPEGs, looking at slides and looking at catalogs, he was going out and actually looking at the work. And he was going and meeting the artists. And so he didn't just have an intellectual connection to it, he had a visceral connection to the work. And that always stayed with me. And so when I became interested in collecting, I decided to go to the auction houses, to go to the galleries, to look at the work, to look at the books, to look at auction catalogs, even for past sales, and just consume as much as I could. But I also found out that you could make appointments at museums and actually go into their collections. So pretty much wherever I went, if there was material that I was interested in, I would make an appointment, have the boxes brought to me. I'd wear the gloves and I would look, touch, examine, look at stamps, look at condition, look at the paper. And materials used. And then
Mhm.
I could also see how work would age over time based on how it was printed or the paper that was used. And so all of this stuff informed me in my connoisseurship. And I recommend to anybody who's serious, don't just rely on someone telling you something, have the experiences yourself.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. I find that there's no replacement than you know you looking at it yourself and understanding all the nuances in the paper and the way each photographer printed their work. Everyone had their own way of doing things and their own style and habits. So yes, you're right, there's no replacing that at all. So how did you develop when you decided, yes, I'm going to buy this, or no, I'm not going to buy that, how did you develop a decision framework around your choices as to what to add to your collection and what not to? Like, how did you make a qualifying of, based on certain photographers, or the age of the print, or those kinds of things? How did you, what did you decide, I'm only going to buy this, or I'm only going to buy that? How did that develop?
Well, as I started to refine my collecting to surrealism, I started to realize too that there were a lot of artists who were creating or had created significant bodies of work that hadn't gotten the acknowledgement or acclaim that I believed they should have. And so I would seek out that work, and I would seek out work by known artists too. But again, at the time when I started, my budget was very limited. And the timing was great because you could still buy quote unquote masterpieces without having to mortgage your home. So I was fortunate in the timing of all of it. I relied on something called chi energy. I believe that all objects that are created, or all objects in general, emanate a force, a life force energy. And I believe that if a creator had actualized their spirit, so to speak, in a creative work, whether it's a painting, a piece of sculpture, a collage, or a photograph, you'll feel it.
Yeah.
And you'll know, even if you don't know anything about it. And so that was one of my main barometers for getting excited.
Mm-hmm.
I would feel it in my spine. I'd get like a buzz and a heat when I would look at something, and that would give me an indication. But then I would use my mind too. I would say, okay, is this a vintage print? That was top line in terms of being pragmatic, what I wanted.
Right.
How rare is this? How well does this represent the artist's work? If I only had to buy one piece, would this do it? And then I had to get realistic and say, and can I afford to buy the best?
Right.
And many times, if I couldn't, I would pass because I didn't want to just get something. I did go through a time when I was able to, where I just was buying 20, 30 pieces a month. But I was always discerning.
Right.
Turn this down.
Well, that sounds like a wonderful framework, to be able to really feel it in your body, and also have a practical structure too, with all of those things. And so how long, like, what was the time period between from when you started to collecting, um to when I have your book here. I'll go ahead and show, and I can put up images that are in here, certain images that you have. But so this book comes from when in 2007, when you sold your collection to the Cleveland Museum.
It was a sale and a gift.
Okay, sale and gift. So what is the time frame from when you started collecting up until the time that you had put that together? Like, how long was that?
12 years.
12 years. Yeah.
So I anything in my life, when I get interested in something, I'm very passionate about it. And I just make it work. And as soon as I said, yes, this is important to me, I dove in, and then lots of things fell into place. I left San Francisco in 2000 and moved to Midtown Manhattan. And all of the dealers, well, not all, but the majority of the dealers that were dealing in the material I was interested in were right there. And I would get a call from Edwin Houck. David, I have this in. I could just literally walk over to his gallery and look.
Mm-hmm.
And on and on and on and on. It made it really easy. Virginia Zabriskie was right there.
Right.
Adam Boxer was right there.
Right.
So I don't know. I guess the gods intervened and got me in the right place at the right time to be able to create a dream collection.
Yeah. Yeah. And you talk a little bit in the book about buying the last piece before you knew that it was a complete, or how you felt like the collection was complete. Can you talk a little bit about that, about when you felt like you had the collection that you wanted or envisioned, or that you felt that it was well-rounded?
Well, that's a multi-layered question in that. Okay, well, I'll
Yes.
begin by answering your question and then take it to another place.
Okay.
When it got to the point where I had boxes and boxes of photographs that couldn't be on the walls, even if I rotated, there wasn't enough space. I said, what am I going to do with this stuff? And it's not fair to the work. And interestingly enough, I would lend a lot to museum exhibitions. And when the work came back, it kind of they had a smile on their faces. If you could believe that art would have faces, it's like, I've been seen, I've been appreciated, but here is this work sitting in boxes. So I said, do I sell at auction just to get it out to the world? Or do I create a legacy? And legacy was interesting to me.
Yes.
And I felt like this was a good encapsulation of modernism and surrealism. It wasn't complete by any means, but it really represented that moment and that time. And there had to be an institution that would want to fill a space in their collection that I've already created. And so a number of museums in Europe were interested. I was fortunate to be neighbors with Charles Isaacs.
Mm-hmm.
And Chuck came over and I had the conversation with him, and he said, I know a few institutions that are going to definitely want to take a look. And Cleveland was one of them.
Mm-hmm.
And the curator at the time, Tom Hinson, sweet soul, he came over, and I remember him looking at each piece that was on the walls with so much intent. I said, if they're interested, I want them to have this. He gets it. And that's what transpired.
That's fantastic.
Interestingly enough, it wasn't hard for me because I felt like this was time. And they got what I was doing. They got my eye. They understood what I was trying to accomplish. I was trying to push the boundaries of what was considered surreal and to try to include other artists who should have been included, like Lartigue, for example.
Mm-hmm.
A bunch of his work was very surreal.
Yes.
And I thought it was important that that be acknowledged. So that felt great to me. But I want to say, to continue that, I thought that I was finished collecting. But a dear friend of mine once said, once you have hoarder's disorder, it's never gonna leave. So I took a break from collecting. But interestingly enough, even after the Cleveland deal had finished, I was on the phone bidding on things at auction. And I just couldn't stop.
Yeah.
And there were some things that Cleveland, I kept out of the Cleveland deal that I kept for myself, including the Dora Maar, which is behind me, it's called Asia with Mask. And I'm so glad. And the George Unier, which is next to it.
Uh-huh.
and the Manuel Alvarez Bravo next to it. So those and others were foundation to start another important collection. So from that point on, I've still continued to buy, not as voraciously, but I still am collecting.
Right. That's fantastic. Yes. Now I think once a collector, always a collector, you know, definitely. Yeah. Wow. And towards that, so what is your, how would you define a collector? Like, what's your definition of what a collector is?
I'd say a collector is also an artist, because if you have a thematic concept for what you're bringing into your collection, you're basically recontextualizing other people's works and creating relationship with work that didn't exist before you interacted with it. And so I feel that that's one level of being a collector. The other is someone who is interested in furthering the knowledge and understanding and appreciation of the work that you're collecting. Someone who's open to lending works to further that understanding, and someone who is curious and always open. I remember having museum curators come over, including most notably Weston Naff, who was the chief curator of the photographs collection at the Getty. He would come over to visit me, and he would be so excited because he knew that he would probably see something he hadn't seen before. So here is this world-renowned curator who remained open and wasn't so jaded as if he thought he'd seen it all. And I think a great collector also embodies that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I would say that's probably for myself, that's what I enjoy about being a dealer the most, is the fact that I get to work with everyone I work with are very passionate people, you know? And that's really one of the joys of what I do, which is fantastic. So how would you say, also, since you know worked with people, you know collectors, you know different gallerists and dealers in the field, you know, how has that impacted your collecting? You know, how has working with experts impacted that, and why would you recommend someone who is a collector or wants to collect? How would you recommend, why would you recommend someone work with an expert, you know, someone like me or somebody else, another gallery?
I think that there's so much to know. And depending on the area you're going to be collecting in, as we discussed, the connoisseurship of it all. And that's something that kind of I feel disheartened about. Connoisseurship has taken a back seat to image-driven collecting. And so what are you doing? Are you buying something to decorate your home, which is fine as long as you're clear about that. But there's so much more to collecting. And if you want to start a collection that has some level of historical significance, I would highly recommend starting to work with someone who can navigate that area for you, help you understand all of the nuances, who's going to help you understand the difference in value between a vintage print, near vintage print, period print, or later print. And also the differences in the printing quality, because I've learned, believe it or not, that sometimes a later print by an artist might be of better quality than a vintage print. So and then also condition we didn't touch on, and you'd ask me about. I have bought work in terrible condition if it was one of and historically significant. And that hasn't bothered me. And I worked with a great conservator, Paul Messier, and his team, to assist me in bringing the works back to life. One notable piece was a Lartigue that's now in the Cleveland Museum of what's her name? Renee Pearl holding a globe. I bought that at an auction in Paris from her estate, and it wasn't in irreparable condition, but it seen better days. And Paul and his team brought it back to life. But most people would have avoided purchasing it. I still paid a lot. Somebody else obviously wanted it, but it was in need of love.
Right. Yes. Yes. And sometimes, in terms of condition, sometimes, every artist has their own way of doing things, their own way of printing. And some artists are, very fastidious in their craft, and other photographers really didn't give a lot of importance to the final print, or they were not as careful. Somebody, I would say, the difference between, just to give an example that a lot of people will recognize, an Ansel Adams, who was a great craftsman, and his prints are, you want to have one pristine, versus somebody like Robert Frank, who wasn't always, a lot of his vintage photographs are, the condition is less important. So even in terms of condition, you have to keep in mind what the habits were of that photographer or that artist. Sure. For sure.
For sure.
And I'm also interested in talking a little bit more about collecting in terms of, and we've touched on it, but maybe we can just go a little bit deeper in terms of creating something that didn't exist, as you had said before, but also how you decide, like, the cohesiveness of a collection, how what areas you are going to what ideas you're going to explore, or themes you're going to explore, and how that is important in when you're putting together a collection. I guess part of what I'm going for is that what I see a lot happening in terms of collections is people will just, they will buy things, but not so much with the idea of putting it together to complete to go into a particular theme or explore an idea. It's just sort of like, a portrait here, a landscape there type of thing. So is there anything that you can talk about in terms of your own experience, or your own thinking or ideas about when you're creating a collection, how you think about theme or your ideas, and how it may develop either with this collection or in general, how those decisions and ideas and themes, how they evolve, or how you think about it when you're making just purchasing decisions, if that makes sense.
Oh, it does. And for me, I'm kind of an oddball. It's all visceral. And I just see the layers and the connections to things. Or sometimes I might not immediately know, but I know somewhere. And so if it feels right, it is.
Right.
It doesn't have to make sense.
Right. I'm sure a lot of that is informed by all of the reading and all of the conversations and all of the looking that you do. It's sort of embedded subconsciously.
Oh, most definitely. But it doesn't take away from someone who, if you look at the surface, has an eclectic collection. Look, if whatever brings you joy, buy it if you can afford it. If I consider when I walk into my home, I have all these friends on the wall, and they're friends that have seen me through, in many cases, lots of phases of my life. And most of them have things to reveal even after 20 plus years. So if I take the time to gaze at something, I always get a gift. And so if you're collecting, to include more joy in your life, it really doesn't matter if you want to do a deep dive and create a thematic collection that has some consistency that will end up in a museum one day. Just do it. It is
Mhm.
so incredible to live with art. My daughter, who's now 10, she's so well informed about the creative process because from the moment she was born, she was surrounded by art and then got curious about it when she was pre-verbal. And so we'd point at things and talk about them. And it's really enhanced the way she sees the world.
Yeah, that's phenomenal. That's phenomenal. That's really fantastic. And so what advice would you give to some, well, I guess you kind of did just give some advice, but if you were talking to someone who was just starting out collecting, what advice would you give?
Be curious. Set a budget for your first purchase.
Mhm.
Be a little flexible with it
Mhm.
and see what makes your heart beat. And don't necessarily jump on it immediately. Take some time. And uh, this is a cliche with most collectors, but I've never regretted what I've purchased. My only regrets have been things that I've passed on.
Mhm.
If something lingers with you, do yourself a favor and buy it because it's talking to you.
Yeah,
So
fantastic.
is that what you were looking for?
Yeah. Something like that. Yes, yes, that's great. That's fantastic. Wow. There's so many things that we've covered so far, and you've given such great information about this. Let me just look over my questions. Um, what would you say? All right. Is
Can I
there,
jump in? Can I jump
yes,
in
please.
with a question? I want to say that when I started my collection, I didn't start it with the intention of creating a museum-worthy collection. It was just purity of passion and curiosity. I didn't, it wasn't like I'm going to start this great world-class collect. No, no, that didn't even come into play.
Mhm.
It happened. And it happened because of my curiosity and my passion. And then I started to see it all come together. So I don't think anybody should have that leaning over them and saying, you need to really be serious or you shouldn't bother to collect. No, just do it. I started collecting snapshots at the flea market and at antique shops for 50 cents, sometimes even 10 cents. And a lot of those ended up in museum shows. So just just do it.
Yeah. Yes. That's great. It's fantastic. Wow. That's so great, David. That's wonderful. I think that we've covered pretty much everything. What would you say? Okay, finish this sentence so that just to finish this up. Finish this sentence. The act of collecting is.
That would be really cheesy. The act of collecting is an act of self-love.
Love it. Oh, I love it. I just love it. Yeah, just love it. Great.
And I didn't think about that. You sent me the questions and I glanced at them, but I said, I'm not going to contemplate them because I want to be present and spontaneous.
Good. That's fantastic. So you said that you still collect a little bit now, you know, still the same type of material, or what do you look at these days?
It is. I still collect surrealist work from the period, but I've also been collecting contemporary work that has a connection to surrealism.
Uh-huh.
One artist who I just am crazy about, her name is Patricia Volgaris, and I just bought 7 pieces by her, and it's phenomenal work, and I want to continue to collect her work. And a few years ago, I bought work by an artist named Tanya Franco Klein. I bought a piece by Mickalene Thomas. I believe that her photographic work has elements of surrealism in it too. An Ethiopian artist named Ida Molinay, who I love, and I've just, yeah, it's been fun.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Um, do you have, if you have any images of those, I would love to see them. I could put them in this in here so that people know that, because I think that's so interesting to see the to follow the through line in history, and to know that you don't have to just be, you know, decide on one time period or one thing, that there is a thread that runs through, and you can find that thread. I find that so interesting. And I do love that, because one of the great things about photography in terms of collecting is that you can you have the whole history, but also just in terms of you could start at any time, but also, like you were saying, buying things at flea markets, you can start at any price level also. You know, it's really, you can buy a real, you know, tintype or a snapshot or something that was done 100 years ago, for, you know, $10. It's amazing.
Or less.
Or less.
And some of them I treasure as much as I treasure a Man Ray. You know, it's not about value. It's about what does it do for me?
Yeah, yeah, that's fantastic. That's wonderful. Wow. Well, this has been fantastic, David. Thank you
I'm so
so
glad.
much. This is really great. And it's
My
so great to
pleasure.
see your face and see you there.
Too.
And
Thank you.
so you're living in South Carolina, right?
Actually,
North
no, North Carolina. I live
North
just
Carolina.
outside of Asheville. I moved here 11 years ago. Big shift from Midtown Manhattan.
Yeah.
We live on a private lake. We have a little compound with multiple buildings on it, and I've learned to make herbal medicine. I go wild foraging. I've become very handy with basic construction stuff. I've even learned to use a chainsaw. It's been great.
Wow. Wow. That is a lot different than Manhattan life. That sounds fantastic. That sounds beautiful. Sounds really great. Wow. Um, well, this is so good, David. Thank you so much. I don't know if I said that in the beginning, but I just so appreciate your time to be willing to talk to me and to do this interview, because it's just, you know, I just I I just think you're such a wonderful person, and I just love your energy, and I love your passion, and you know, and you're just someone I'm very, very fond of.
Oh,
So
Janet, thank you.
thank you so much. This has
Oh,
just
my,
been
my
fantastic.
pleasure.
Yeah.
I just really wish for people to not be afraid to take that first step to bring beauty into their lives. So any way I can inspire it, count me in.
Okay. Fantastic. Great. Thank you. All right. Well, I want to be mindful of your time because I know you're a busy person. But this has just been fantastic. Um, and I just wish you the best and that we can just still stay in touch. But I just really appreciate this because I just think that it's just so important for the mind of the collector to be, for people to hear these things and what it's like. Sometimes it can feel, I think people feel a little solitary. So to have a little community, to know there's a community out there of like-minded individuals that sharing this passion is just really important and really inspiring. So thank you so much.
Oh, you're so welcome. And just send me a note to get those images off to you so it doesn't leave my mind, and I'll make sure I get it taken care of, and let me know what the time frame is that you need it by.
Okay, I will do that. I will do that. Okay, great.
Great to see you.
All right, really great to see you, David. Okay, thank you.
You too. Good luck with this project too.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. It's going to be great.
Cool.
All right, great. Okay, take care.
You too. Be well.
Okay. So as promised, here are images David shared with me of some contemporary photographs that are part of his current collection. As you look at them, you can start to see that there's a similar thread of David's really discerning eye and the surrealist nature of these contemporary photographs. They're just fantastic. So if you have questions or comments about what David and I talked about, you can send me an email at janet@sermonefineart.com. I also invite you to visit my website to check out what's going on. I have a virtual workshop on collecting you can get instant access to, as well as a simple collecting guide. And while you're there, if you want to keep in touch and be informed about the next On Collecting conversation, sign up for my weekly newsletter. Until then, I will see you next time.